This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast here on YouTube. If you can, help me out, go down below, hit that subscribe button. Today, our special guest is Brett Friedman. He's an outdoor skills instructor. He's paddled all over the world, including Alaska, Baja. He also has a YouTube channel called Adventure Otaku, which you should definitely go check out. He's got some great information on there. So let's dive right into it. Hey, Brett, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for joining me again. I know you came on early and you told a Halloween story about your scary bear encounter, but you live an interesting life, man. I really wanted to get you back and talk some serious outdoors and some serious adventure stuff that you've been doing. So, how have you been 2021? How are you doing this year?
I think I'm doing as well as anyone is doing. But in general, I'm doing well. I have nothing to complain about. I'd love to get through this phase and back to teaching full time. But, in the scheme of things, all is good.
Yeah, that's the way to be. That's a good mindset to have. One of the first questions that I always like to ask anybody who comes on the show is, now you're this badass outdoor skill instructor going all over the world, traveling, doing all this cool stuff. But kind of growing up, how did you get into the outdoors? Was it something that was just like your whole life, or is it something you fell into maybe when you were an adult?
Yeah, so the first thing I have to correct is about the least thing I view myself as badass. Come on, man.
I do.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I fell into it. So I grew up in New York on Long Island, which I like to describe to people as the home of serial killers and failed nuclear power plants. You have to be a local to get that one. I grew up playing ice hockey. And when I finished high school, I realized that I was not going to become a professional ice hockey player at 5'7" and all of about 145 pounds, and spent about 6 months really just getting into trouble. And at some point, I saw something about rock climbing and was like, I need to find something to sort of focus myself because I am all over the place. And so I saw rock climbing somewhere and started rock climbing. And I should point out, this is probably like 1986. In 1986, there was no such thing as a rock gym. And so I taught myself how to rock climb. I read a bunch of books and stuff like that, but it wasn't even easy to find instruction at that point. And so it was not the way to learn how to rock climb. It was incredibly unsafe, but that was my entry into the outdoors. From rock climbing, it progressed to backpacking and I guess to like car camping, and then car camping became backpacking, and then backpacking became kayak camping, and paddling in general. And I did all of those things consistently until probably 10 years ago, when I actually just made a conscious decision to stop climbing. And there were a lot of reasons for that. As you get older, it gets a lot harder just physically on your body. And I wanted to sort of focus where I was spending my outdoor energy or abilities, and I felt like the risk versus reward of climbing was not a great payoff for me. And so I started doing other things and just sort of drifted out of it. It's one of those things that people have constantly asked me to teach of my many employers is, hey, do you want to teach rock climbing? It's like, I really don't want to teach rock climbing. I love climbing. It was a great entry into the outdoors, but it's not something that I want to slide back into.
Yeah, that's what I always say. I am like into a lot of the outdoors activities. Like you said, like in the last couple of years, I've really gotten into paddling a lot. And that's how I feel about skiing. It's just one of those things. I've done it a handful of times, and it's not my thing. And people are always like, "Oh, you should just really try it again." I'm like, it's just once you do enough activities, you kind of learn which ones aren't for you, and I feel like that's one of them. So you have a lot of experience in outdoor education. How did that come about as a career choice for you? Because I know in the past you said you were an EMT for a while, and now you're an outdoors instructor. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so that's a great question coming from the rock climbing, because really what happened was in about the late 90s, when I got into kayaking, I realized I didn't want to repeat the mistakes of being a self-taught climber. I wanted to learn the right way to paddle and really the right way to be doing stuff in the outdoors in general. And so I did a Knowles kayaking course in Alaska, a 2-week, which at the time, or maybe 16 days, which at the time was the shortest course that Knowles offered. I had a job, so I had to get a lot of time off from work comparatively. And I went to Alaska and did a 2-week, 23 and over paddling course, really because I wanted to learn how to paddle. A lot of times I think with Knowles courses is people do them to learn a skill and forget that Knowles is actually a leadership school. Knowles is the National Outdoor Leadership School. And so I went there like, yeah, I really don't care about the leadership curriculum. I want to go kayaking in Alaska. And it turns out it's the leadership curriculum that I use every day. That's my 2-minute plug for Knowles. But in any case, I got a great grounding in kayaking itself and in kayaking skills. I got really the real problem, and it really is a problem that I got, was an addiction to paddling in Alaska. And so I left that course and went back to where I lived at the time in New York City. And I was working in photography at the time. And I was like, you know what? This was great. I do not want to be spending the rest of my life in a photo studio, as much fun as that is. I want to be out. I want to be working outside, and I want to be impacting people. And that started my transition. And so I started figuring out what I needed to do to work in the outdoor industry. And I realized I needed to have some sort of medical certification. So I went and took a 10-day wilderness first responder course. And then I was like, I really dug this. And that was when I became an EMT. I was like, I want to keep learning. And the easiest way to keep learning is to be doing this full time. And so that was my transition. I would love to say that it was a well thought out plan. But in fact, it was very much, ooh, this was cool. Let's go this way. Ooh, bright, shiny thing. Let's follow that.
Yeah.
And so that was my transition into teaching in the outdoors.
I really like that mindset, because I've seen a lot of people, they really, no matter what they're into, there's like a lot of people, the video things are all popular now because anyone on the internet, like anyone, you, me, everyone can start a YouTube channel and buy a DSLR or a GoPro and just go after it. But I really like that mindset of, I want to get better at this. So instead of just like doing it as a hobby, you got a job in that field. And then that led you to your career in the outdoors. And I think that is a really good step to take, because you're not like putting all your eggs in one basket. I think that's really smart. Which leads me to, you did a really cool video on authenticity in the outdoors, which I thought was really good because it's something we all struggle with, whether you're the person who is kind of like putting off that you're better than you are in the outdoors, or you're the opposite and you're really skilled, but you kind of are like nervous about that. So what is your philosophy on this authenticity in the outdoors?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well. It's something I think a lot about. There is actually a rock on my desk right in front of my keyboard with the word authenticity etched into it. And it was a gift from someone I worked with in the outdoor industry. Like, they went to an event where they got these rocks and each of them said something different about the outdoors. And when they left the company, that she gave away the rocks, and she gave me authenticity, which I thought was really interesting. It is something I struggle with, is like, am I being authentic? And that is really just sort of my mindset on it are the choices that I'm making and what I'm doing authentic to the person that I want to be, not even how I'm projecting to other people. There are definitely, and I see this a lot with outdoor instructors, like big ego and I know everything. And I try not to think about that. I think everyone thinks about how they're perceived, but am I being authentic to the person that I want to be? And I sort of try to let the other stuff just sort of deal with the other stuff. Just let those things occur. But as long as I'm authentic to who I am and what I want to be, who I want to be as a person, and that person is really just helping people have good experiences in the outdoors and treating people around me with respect. And that's, at the end of the day, that's it, And so I'm like the first one to admit, I have a Sprinter van, or I'm in process of doing another Sprinter van build. I did that because I got tired of rolling into a campsite and setting up a tent and having to do all that stuff. I now pull into a campsite and I get in bed. I'm a little bit older. That's me being authentic. I still spend, dozens of nights out, if not more, in a tent every year. But having that ability to just pull into, a campsite or a park or wherever and just go to bed is really nice at 53 and 20 years in the outdoor industry. You know?
Yeah.
So that's the sort of stuff that I try and do.
Yeah, and that's really important. I've fallen into a similar mindset because, you know, obviously I have the podcast and I'm always talking about the outdoors, but you know, I'm not always the expert. Like when it comes to backpacking and after, you know, through hiking the Appalachian Trail and stuff, like I know backpacking enough where I can feel confident, but in a lot of other stuff, I'm not the expert. You know, I have a lot of activities I enjoy, mountain biking being the most recent, but I'm nowhere near, like, I would never be able to teach somebody at this point because I'm barely able to stay on the dang bike myself. So I totally agree with you there. And I'm starting to follow down that same kind of road. Like when I was in my maybe like late teens, early 20s, if it wasn't like hardcore backpacking, backcountry, I was like, I don't want anything to do with it. But now I find myself taking friends that want to get into the outdoors and we'll just go car camping. I went car camping was like 12 degrees outside in a state park here in Ohio with some friends 2 weekends ago. And it was great. You know, you don't have to set up your whole backcountry camping and all this stuff and be super hardcore all the time to enjoy the outdoors. I love that.
And it's super enjoyable to see it through those people's eyes. That's one of the things I like about teaching is I get to see people getting that exposure to the outdoors for the first time. So you were seeing people probably deal with camping in 12-degree weather, which is challenging for the very first time. And I bet you it was just an amazing experience. It just makes it a better experience for you to live it through them.
And when I always say, like, when something sucks and you're by yourself, it really sucks. But when it sucks with other people, it's fun because you can laugh about it. Like, oh yeah, this really sucks too. My hands, I can't feel them either. And to further elaborate on your van life, I think that's really cool because I've always wanted to get a cool van like that for adventuring because I just have a little SUV, a little Jeep Cherokee that I drive around now, which is perfect for my wife and myself. But when did the van idea come around? Because you got a pretty sweet setup, and I know you're doing a new one now. But
yeah. So I love that van. It pained me a little bit to sell it, but it went to a really nice couple that are rock climbers that are going to use it for trips. But the van started for me two ways. The first was that we wanted to be able to go camping with our two dogs. So I have two bull terriers. One weighs 45 pounds, one weighs 60 pounds. So they're not little dogs. And when we go camping, even just car camping, there's either a mountain bike or a kayak or something, you know, so there's always gear. And at the time we had two tiny little Toyotas. And so we realized that when we wanted to go camping, we needed to bring both cars. So the first thing was we wanted a vehicle where we could go camping and bring the dogs and bring the gear and not really stress about space. If you ever, you know, when you talk a lot about backpacking, we talk about buy a smaller pack because if you buy a bigger pack, you'll fill it. Mm-hmm. I have a photo of the back of my Sprinter van filled with gear. I'm like, if you want proof that if you've got space, you'll fill it, just buy a Sprinter van. So that was the first thing. And then it very quickly became evident that it was, without a doubt, the best office for an outdoor educator in the world. So we built it really minimal. We just a very simple countertop that was sized for like a 2-burner Coleman stove, but also worked really well as a standing desk. So it was things like that. It was just super simple and just gave me the ability to work out of it, and it gave us the ability to go camping in it. So that worked great. But then my wife and I decided, had a 15-second conversation and decided that we were going to sell just about everything and try and do a year on the road. And so part of that was we would have to have had I would have had to have emptied that van down to the bare metal to rebuild it the way that we want to rebuild it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it's just easier really to start over. So I just bought a new van. I picked it up a week ago. It is still just a straight up cargo van. And so that build will start in about a week and a half. I'm a little concerned with COVID that I'll be able to get all the things I need, mm-hmm. but sort of the trial run for doing a year in the van is in May. My son is getting married in Denver, and so we're taking a month to drive out in the van. So I've got like 2.5 months to get the van workable. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think I can get it done. And so the plan there is a build that is more workable for living in, essentially.
And what kind of adaptations are you looking for compared to your old van? Because I mean, you had a pretty sweet setup. It's in most of your videos, so that people can take a look at it.
It's the basis for most of my videos. So the biggest thing is that one of my dogs, even though she's not that old, has both early onset arthritis in one of her hips and also broke a paw when she was like 2 or 3. And so she has some mobility issues and she's in pain a fair amount of the time. And she sleeps a lot of her life because she's in pain. And so it sounds crazy, but one of the things that we need to do is there has to be a couch somewhere in the van that she can sleep on. She sleeps on a couch all day long, and that van did not have a couch. And my wife was like, if we're going to do this, Eloise has to have a couch. Eloise is my dog. And so that's the biggest thing is it's got to have a couch. And then some other things, a little bit more power, a little bit more solar, a little bit better storage, things like that. The general layout will stay the same as my last van, but a lot of changes within that layout.
The question I ask myself every time I see your van with the kayak on top is how the hell do you get that kayak up there? That's a long way to go.
It is a long way to go, and it is without a doubt the most common question that I got. And so the manufacturer of the kayak, so Delta Kayaks, actually messaged me on Instagram, hey, can you shoot a video of getting that kayak up there? And so I include it occasionally in videos just so people can see it. It's really actually not that hard. Because the kayak is so long, the kayak is 17 feet long, I can just really put the nose up there, climb up there and drag it up. It's not that hard. But I've had people like stop me in parks and be like, how do you get the kayak down? So yeah, that's a super common question. Absolutely.
While we're on it, kayaking is super fun. I would say most of your videos center around kayaking. What is so special about kayaking to you, and kind of why is that like your main mode of video and vlogging and all of that stuff?
Yeah, so it's a number of things. The first thing is, particularly compared to backpacking, and I get in trouble with a lot of thru hikers when I talk about this, but I frequently compare, I appreciate that. I frequently compare what is arguably the most famous hiking trail in the world, the Appalachian Trail, to the most famous kayaking trail in the world, the Inside Passage. So I haven't thru hiked the AT, but I've done most of the AT from the New York State line up. And I've done bits and pieces of it down here, including I did Springer and North for about 4 days. So a fair amount of experience on the AT. And I think the last year that we have data on the AT was like 2017, or at least the last time I saw data. And it was something like 3,300 people attempted to thru hike the AT in 2017. In 2011, the year that I did the Inside Passage, and I just did in 2011, I did the Alaska section. So from Ketchikan to Skagway, about 350 miles, was an incredibly busy year on the Inside Passage for kayakers. There were 11 people that did it that year. And so the first thing that drew me to kayaking was the solitude, right? It was you do not see, if you're going to a kayak or a paddle-in campsite, you are not going to see another paddler. In the busiest of seasons, you're not going to see someone. So the first thing is the solitude, the easy access to quiet backcountry, right? Which as a backpacker, not even on the AT, just as a backpacker, you generally have to hike 2 or 3 days really into remote to be alone. Chances are you're going to see someone. That does not happen in kayaking. The other thing about kayaking, this is going to sound superficial, but the food is just way better, man. I've got enough dry storage in my kayak, about the equivalent to about 2 100-liter backpacks. And so I can pack in, if it fits in the hatch opening, I can pack it in. I can pack in anything I want. When I did the Inside Passage, we planned that trip for 30 days. We actually did it in 21, but I was able to get 30 days of food and fuel and gear in my kayak. The only thing we resupplied on that trip was the woman I paddled it with packed in beer, and she lined her keel line with beer cans so that at the end of the day, like we're paddling in like 50-degree water, so your hull is cold, so the beer cans are cold. So at the end of the day, she'd have a cold beer, and she would say to me, Brett, we got to stop in such and such a town because I'm going to run out of beer. It's like, that was the only thing we resupplied on that entire trip.
Can't complain about that.
You really can't. So those are two things about it that I really like. I really like that paddling a kayak correctly and efficiently is extremely counterintuitive. The beautiful thing about paddling a kayak is you can walk into, a big box store, a Dick's or whatever, buy a paddle, a kayak, and if I personally am lucky, you'll buy a PFD and wear it, but a lot of people don't. And you can take that paddle and kayak and put it in the roof of your car and go to the water and go paddling and have a great time. That is a great thing. It is easy access, and that's wonderful that it's easy access. The downside of it is that you can do that. There's no sort of expectation that you need any sort of instruction. And that is bad in terms of you're paddling wrong. If you haven't been taught how to paddle a kayak, you're paddling wrong. And it also is dangerous. You think of, I'm going to get on a lake and it's very serene and it's very calm. And so clearly there's safety there, but you're in a water environment. And when paddling situations go bad, they tend to go very bad very quickly. And so that is something, again, why I said, if I'm lucky, you'll wear a PFD, because I've dealt with those situations after the fact and they're never pleasant. So if you're paddling, please take a lesson, please wear a PFD. I'll leave it there.
Well, and no, that's a very good point. I agree with you on everything you've said. Like I said earlier when we were talking, I got into paddling pretty hard in the last couple of years. And I did, we have a local river here. I won't dwell on it because I've said it in pretty much every other podcast I've done. But we through paddled the river, the local river we have here, because that's something I'm really big on, no matter where you're at. I mean, even especially in the U.S., you can find cool stuff to do locally. You might have to search a little harder, which we can touch on here in a second. But that so many people here, because the river, the Maumee River, is not a raging, roaring, whitewater rapid river. So many people just think you can go on and not have to worry about, like you said, PFDs. You don't have to think about safety. You just tool around, have fun, drink beer. And every year, without fail, early spring comes around, the first warm day of the year. People think the water just immediately gets up to super warm temperature. Someone falls in, gets hypothermia, spills their beer, don't have a PFD on, almost die. It's definitely something I 100% agree with. I always wear a PFD when I'm kayaking. Always.
Yeah. Yeah, and rivers in particular are dangerous for that same sort of reason. Is it looks serene, right? A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. Mm-hmm. So if you think about how much, if you're paddling in a sit-in kayak, how many gallons of water will fit in that cockpit with you, could be 100 gallons of water easily, which is 800 pounds of water. It is a recipe for disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, all it takes is you hit a shallow section, you smack your head on a rock, and it's game over. You're done.
Exactly.
So yes, I preach that too with safety. I mean, it's not. Why would you not risk it over a $40 life jacket? I mean, come on, people, get your stuff together. But locally, where you're at, I believe you're in North Carolina still, right?
Yep, Central North Carolina.
So what are some of your favorite places to explore down there? I know you got some pretty good water down there.
Yeah, so I'm not a river paddler. That's not my thing. But man, do we have whitewater here. The Yosemite of whitewater is in Western North Carolina. And to go along with that, we have the U.S. National Whitewater Center, which I have paddled, and it is an absolute blast. One of the funniest experiences of my life was a buddy who's a whitewater paddler took me to the Whitewater Center. And I was pretty confident that my skills in a sea kayak would transfer pretty well. I've got a good roll, all that stuff. I have never spent so much time inadvertently upside down in a kayak in my life. The video is really just me rolling. It's hilarious. So we've got things like that. We've got great backpacking here in Central North Carolina. But in 2 days, I am headed to the coast, which is where I live and breathe. I don't generally get to teach there, but I do a little bit. But I'm headed to the coast to paddle and explore some places that I haven't been. So I'm heading out to the Outer Banks, which are part of our barrier islands in eastern North Carolina. And I'm going to be out there for about 4 days. And then I'm heading up to Virginia Beach, which is where I'm thinking about relocating to. And I've never paddled up there. And so I'm very curious. It looks like a really vibrant paddling community. I'm really excited to sort of dip my toes into a different location. And to be able to have immediate access to ocean again will be really nice, as I'm about 3 to 5 hours from my coast, depending on where I go. So yeah, water is everywhere, which is really nice.
Yeah, my cousin lives down there. I actually was down there not too long ago, and we went to the Whitewater Center. I stayed with him and his in-laws, and they literally live like 5 minutes from the Whitewater Center. And it's somewhere he always talks to me about. He'll call me and he'll be like, "You got to get down here. You got to go to the Whitewater Center." Obviously, when I went, it was like 30 degrees or 40 degrees out, so they were closed down basically.
Yeah.
But that place is amazing. I was so blown away.
Absolutely amazing facility. Yeah.
There's just when they explain it to me, they're like, "Oh, it's this big like pool where you do whitewater," and I imagine just like a wave pool. And then you see it in person. It's how long is that? It's astounding.
Yeah, there are essentially two different. They built a river, and there are two branches that feed back into a circle, right? And then a conveyor belt to bring boats and rafts back up to the top, and then it dumps you back into a huge pool. It's an amazing facility. And then there's huge outdoor rock climbing walls and mountain biking, and you can paddle an actual real river there and stand up paddleboard. And I think they added zip lines at one point.
Yep.
It's an amazing facility. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So, while we're plugging away here, winter kayaking, that's to me, it sounds really awesome, but you need to really have like the proper gear. 'Cause you talk about danger in the summer, winter, you bring in a whole new element. So what's kind of what's the mindset on winter kayaking specifically?
Yeah, the mindset is, and this is really to be aware of all the time, is dress for immersion, right? So yes, in winter, I'm dealing with water here that is in the 60s or less. It'll get progressively colder until April, and then it'll start warming up pretty quickly where I am. But so pretty cold water, and my sort of level of prepared is what happens if you end up in the water. And I'm wearing a dry suit, obviously under a PFD with like a mid-weight performance base layer under it, so that if I end up in the water, I am dry and somewhat warm. Dry suits keep you dry; they don't really keep you warm, but it buys you the time to sort of deal with the problem. And it's a topic I've been talking about a lot in videos. Is people frequently ask me what I'm wearing all through the fall. People are like, "What are you wearing? What are you wearing when you go paddling in weather like that?" And so I've talked a lot on my YouTube channel about sort of my progression in the summer from a bathing suit and a quick dry UPF shirt, which then I go to like a Patagonia winter weight running tight, which wicks moisture really quickly and adds some insulation. Still a quick dry shirt. Then I add a rain shell. I don't use an expensive paddling jacket, just a regular rain shell like you use hiking, which everyone has. So far, all of this stuff is stuff that anyone has. And then when it starts getting really cold, when the rain shell isn't quite enough, or when the water temperature is getting so low that I really need to be thinking about it in terms of a safety issue, is when a lot of people go to wetsuits. In general, I don't like wetsuits. I don't think they're comfortable, and they don't really perform. They don't do what they're designed to do unless they're in the water or there's water trapped inside of them, right? So your body warms a very thin layer of water that's trapped inside the dry suit, which is what keeps you warm. Then when you get out of the water, that water drains out. So really, you're just wearing a big rubber suit. So that's my take on it. I know a lot of people go to wetsuits, and if that works for you, awesome. I go straight to a dry suit. And that's a lot of wetsuit people will eventually transition to a dry suit as well. I'm just going to go there. And sometimes I wear thinner base layers if it's the air is still warm, but it's that water temperature that we're paying attention to. And I've always got a dry set of clothes back in my vehicle so that if something bad does happen, I can get out of wet clothes and into dry clothes. I've always got water. I've always got some food in the boat. I've always got a first aid kit. I've always got a bilge pump. I've always got a paddle float. I almost always have a tow rope of some sort, either a short tow or a long tow, depending on what I'm doing. I always have a way to make noise, so a whistle is attached to my PFD. And so that's something I think a lot about. And again, as someone who's been active in the outdoors for a long time and has been teaching for a long time, I feel like it's important for me to role model that both in person and in videos. If I see someone paddling without a PFD, I'm going to have a little conversation with them afterwards, when they're back on land.
Yeah, it's definitely super, super scary. Even when I'm out seeing people without life jackets, it's just like, man, this day could turn real bad for you real quick, and it's not something you ever want to see. So I understand that. So let's go back to your Alaskan kayaking trip. That looks just like amazing. Have you done that trip multiple times, or have you been up there?
I've only done the Inside Passage in Alaska once. I've paddled the British Columbia section of the Inside Passage as well, most of it, not all of it, but most of it. And I've paddled in Prince William Sound in Alaska a bunch of times because that's where I worked with Knowles. And I've done some personal trips there as well. So I've paddled Alaska, I don't know how many times at this point, but I've only done the Inside Passage once. And the Inside Passage trip was something that, again, to draw a parallel to the AT, it's the trip that paddlers say, oh man, that's on my bucket list. That's the trip I want to do. Much like people say about the AT. And after, I would say, about 10 years of saying that to people, I said, I've got to either just do this or shut up about it. And so I got buy-in from my wife, who was like, if it's important for you to do it, then it's important for me for you to do it. And I got clearance from my employer to say, yeah, you can take a leave and you'll have a job when you get back. We think it's a super cool thing for you to do. And then it was just a matter of planning it and making it happen. And I think I spent about 18 months planning it. And essentially the way that it worked out was I drove from central North Carolina to Skagway, Alaska, parked my car, took my boat and all the gear, got on a ferry, which I took to Ketchikan, Alaska, met up with a friend of mine in Ketchikan who came up on the same ferry from Vancouver. Then we paddled back to my car where she got on a ferry and went home. My wife flew to Skagway, met me in Alaska, and then she and I drove back to North Carolina.
What kind of season are you going out and paddling something like this?
Yeah, that's Alaskan summer. So we did that. I know that I got to Skagway on my birthday, which is June 22nd. I think we started paddling June, probably if it's the 22nd, probably the 26th we started paddling. So I also remember that we paddled through the 4th of July, and we were off the water sometime around July 18th or 19th, something like that. Yeah, so planned it on it being a month, and we did it relatively quickly because the woman that I was paddling with had a hard deadline. She had to be on a certain ferry. And our real concern was at any point the weather can change and you just can't get off the beach. And that could happen. You could be on that same beach for 3 or 4 or 5 days. So particularly in the beginning, we were like, the weather is great. Let's just bang out miles. Let's just keep banging out miles because we could get stuck at any point. And then at some point we turned around and realized, oh my God, we're 70 miles from the end. We raced through it. So we really did it quickly. And we ended up taking, I think, 3 rest days. One after the longest day I've ever paddled was a 42-mile day. I said to Sarah, the one we were paddling with, I think we should just take a rest day tomorrow. We just did a lot. And then in Juneau, we stopped for 2 days because, of course, I got the flu. So I started with sniffles early in the trip. And by the time we got to Juneau, I was full on fever and sneezing and coughing. And yeah, so we took an overpriced hotel for 2 days and Sarah hung out in Juneau and I stayed in bed. Yeah. And it was like, I was not sure. I said to Sarah when we got off the water in Juneau, I said, if you were not here, I'd be getting on a ferry. And she was like, I am not letting you get on a ferry. We are 70 miles from the end. We can do this. So yeah, it was something.
Are there any really outstanding moments from that trip that kind of stick out in your mind?
So the bear story, I don't know if I talked about the bear, but the other thing that went on that same day was that we got cut off by a cruise ship earlier in the day before the bear. And so that whole day was pretty bizarre. So we got up and it was beautiful weather and we were paddling, and we stopped in front of some islands doing a sort of an open water crossing between an opening of an inlet. And there were some islands in the middle and we stopped to take a break. And, while we were paddling, we started hearing music. And so you think you're going crazy. And I turned to Sarah at one point and I said, are you hearing music or am I losing my mind? She's like, I'm so glad you said that because I'm hearing music too. And we looked around and realized that a few miles behind us was a cruise ship. And so we saw the music long before we heard the music long before we saw the cruise ship. And so there were also some other boats around. Alaska is what's called a working wilderness. So there were fishermen around and things like that. And there was another largish black ship that we thought was like a commercial fishing vessel. And so I turned to Sarah and said, you know what? We were at that sort of middle point of the crossing. I said, I'm going to turn on the VHF radio. So I have a VHF radio in a waterproof box that sort of sits between my feet inside my cockpit. So we had already stopped. We were taking a break. And I opened up the case. I screwed on the antenna and stuck it in my PFD, and was just sort of listening, and nothing was going on. We were hanging out. And like within a couple minutes, we heard that cruise ship calling out, doing what's called a securite call. And so they go, securite, which is essentially just a way of saying, hey, everyone listen to what I'm going to tell you. You need to know what's going on. This is the Carnival Spirit. I still remember exactly what cruise ship it was because they cut us off. We're going to be making a turn to starboard and entering the Tracy Arm. And so Sarah and I looked at each other and was like, are we in front of Tracy Arm? And Tracy Arm is an inlet that goes into what the rest of the world would call a fjord. And there's glaciers in there. And the cruise ship was going in so that their passengers could see the glaciers calving. And so we quickly looked at what happened. It was like, because we were just paddling north. We were just, are we on track? We weren't really paying attention to exactly where we were. And she was like, yeah, this is the opening to Tracy Arm. And we were like, do you think he knows we're here? And we were like, I don't know. She was like, you got to call him and tell him that we're here. And I was like, oh, man. So I do a securite back, securite. A Carnival Spirit, please be advised on your starboard side, you have two kayaks. And all they said back to us was, we see you, kayaks. And I turned to Sarah and I was like, what does that mean, we see you? And so we agreed, technically, we totally had the right of way. We are a human-powered craft. They're a huge cruise ship. We have the right of way. But there is another thing that most people are not aware of, which is the rule of tonnage, right? And so they can't stop that cruise ship. So we're going to adhere to the rule of tonnage, and we're going to sit right here and let them move past us. And I don't honestly remember if I told them that we were going to stay where we were or not. I think I probably did. So we sat there, and they cut right in front of us, probably a mile away, creating a huge wake that we paddled through. And it was an absolutely wild experience. And it turned out that the black ship that we thought was a commercial fishing boat was actually the U.S. Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard reached out to us a little bit later because I had accidentally at some point keyed my mic. So I was transmitting whatever Sarah and I were talking about. And so we were super proud of ourselves for doing the interaction with the cruise ship well. And then we blew all cool by my accidentally keying the microphone. But we immediately wondered if the only reason that they did the securite call was because the Coast Guard was there and someone was watching them. So probably. Yeah. So that was an amazing day and had two really amazing things occur. But the entire thing was amazing. It was absolutely gorgeous. We saw, we had great interactions with some local fishermen on numerous occasions. We had an amazing interaction with a beach that we pulled into on July 4th. There was a family that lived in a cabin, like parents and kids and grandkids all lived in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. And they had taken their boat and their ATVs into this little cove where we were going to camp. And they had a fire going because it was, of course, raining because it's Alaska. And they were like, come on in. And there were dogs running around. It was an absolute blast. So it's an amazing place. And that's why I tell people I struggle with an addiction to kayaking in Alaska, because every time I go there, I'm like, this is great. I got to come back.
Yeah, that trip sounds so, like, for me, I kind of like bum myself out doing all these different podcasts with people who do cool stuff, because then I'm like, nah, my list just keeps growing every week with these podcasts. I'm like, I got to go there. I'm going to be broke by the time I get all this stuff done and over with.
Exactly.
But while we're on the topic, another trip you did, you did a Knowles course in Baja in Mexico. That looked super awesome. I believe it was sailing, correct?
It was sailing. And so when I finished my last book, Go, the last chapter is called Next Steps, which is a term we use in outdoor education a lot. Is like, hey, you did a great job today, but here are the things you need to work on, and here's what you should be building towards. And we try to apply those to ourselves as well. And so a couple years after I did the Inside Passage, I started thinking about, okay, what I need another, right? A next trip. What am I going to work on? And I'm a big proponent of constantly working on skills, learning new things and things like that. The outdoor educators that are like, oh, I know everything. I've been doing this for 20 years. They stop learning. and your skills deteriorate once you stop learning. And so I've got to figure out ways to push myself and be continually learning. And I started thinking about, what are the things that I'd like to do? You know what? I'd like to cross an ocean. I am not stupid enough to think that I'm going to cross an ocean in a kayak. But for a little while, a lot of people, even a few years ago, it's even more so now, but even a few years ago when this started, a lot of people are rowing across the Atlantic. A surprising number of people. I just saw that a 20-year-old woman did it, the youngest woman in history, just finished rowing across the Atlantic today, the youngest woman to row across the Atlantic. So I was like, I could row across the Atlantic. And then I came to my senses. That just does not sound like fun. And then I said, okay, so what would be a fun way to cross an Atlantic? And a fun way to cross the Atlantic would be in a sailboat. I want to sail across the Atlantic, and I want to do it with people. I don't want to do it alone. I want it to be a group thing. And there were a few hurdles, minor hurdles, right, that have to be overcome. The first was that I don't know how to sail. Or at the time when I thought of this, I didn't know how to sail. I grew up on boats. I work in and around the water, but I somehow never managed to learn how to sail. The other problem was that I don't own a sailboat, particularly a sailboat suitable for crossing an ocean. So that's a little bit of a hurdle, as well as sailboats are expensive. So we deal with problems one at a time and work through the problem, right? And so problem number one is I didn't know how to sail, so let's learn how to sail. So I started looking at a bunch of things, and I did a course with the American Sailing Association. And I don't mean to knock the ASA. We are great in the United States at teaching youth, teaching kids and teenagers how to sail. All over the country, easily, low impact, we are great at teaching kids to sail. We are not great at teaching adults how to sail. I had a number of bad experiences with instructors, and finally found a great instructor. I went to the local sort of yacht club, which is they didn't have yachts. They had sailing racing dinghies. And I went to them and said, look, I want to learn how to sail, but all of your adult sail stuff is on weekends. And I'm an outdoor educator and I work every weekend. Can you partner me with an instructor who I'll pay them and they can teach me to sail when our schedules align? And they didn't really know how to handle that. They had all sorts of concerns. They had concerns about liability and insurance and things like that. I'm like, guys, I do this literally every day. These are easy problems to solve. Here's how you do the insurance. I pay her as an independent contractor. It's easy. But it was out of their realm because we're just not good at teaching adults. And so I ended up getting hooked up with a woman who's a retiree, and she does two things. She races little tiny sailboats, and she knits or crochets or something like that. And she was amazing. She was a great sailing instructor. She was absolutely amazing. So I sailed with her my plan was to sail with her 4 times. After the 3rd time, she was like, okay, you're ready to sail on your own. And I was like, nope, I am not ready to sail on my own. We're doing this one more time. She was like, okay. So I did that. And then I started looking at taking courses from other companies and things like that to get experience in bigger boats. As I said, I did an ASA course to get certified to sail keel boats, which is full-size boats. And really, I just started looking at how do I build experience in order to get better at this? And I was like, it took me a ridiculously long time to figure it out. But I was like, dude, go back to Knowles. You had a great experience going to Knowles to learn how to kayak. They prepped you for a lifetime in kayaks. Go do a Baja sailing course. The one thing I'll say about Knowles is that I feel like their sailing courses are great. It was an amazing experience. We were in 22-foot long open longboat sailboats. We had zero technology. We didn't have GPS. We barely had charts. We measured boat speed the same way you would have measured boat speed in the 1400s. It was that level of technology, but it was a great foundation in sailing and the way sailing boats work and how to plan a trip and how to have an experience on a sailboat and do it safely. But where Knowles is missing is, how many sailing YouTube channels are there? How many 20-somethings are like, ooh, I want to learn how to sail a boat. They don't want to learn how to sail a 22-foot open boat. They want to learn how to sail a modern boat with GPS and all that stuff. That's something I'd like to see Knowles do a little bit better. But it was an amazing experience. We camped on the beaches in Baja. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was an absolute blast. Yeah. And it was a short course. It was 9 or 10 days. And I got very lucky. I went in February. So the pandemic was just sort of starting. I got back and then everything sort of locked down. And the cool thing is that because I'm planning this trip and I want to do it with people, I want my wife to go on this adventure with me. And so she did a Knowles sailing course on her own, and she did it in December. So I went 2 months after she did. And she had a great time too. So it was a really wonderful experience.
Yeah, and you did a great sort of like mini series on YouTube of your adventure, which is really cool. That's really awesome that you kind of document what you're doing so that, you know, people who are interested in stuff like that can kind of get a behind the scenes look at what it's really like. Because I'm assuming those Knowles courses aren't cheap, but they're definitely get your money's worth.
Yeah, they're not cheap, but a lot of times what Knowles talks about is they break down to like, you know, $175 a day, and it includes your food and your lodging and all that. Like if you tried to have another vacation, you couldn't do it for $175 a day. And at the same time, you're getting an amazing adventure, and that leadership curriculum is there and all that sort of stuff is there. And it was neat to do it in an environment. Like I had paddled in Baja, but not in that area. So it was neat to do it in an environment that I was not that familiar with. One of my big regrets in life is that when I left Knowles kayaking and I switched over to Knowles Wilderness Medicine, I had never figured out a way to teach a kayaking course with Knowles in Patagonia. And so that is one of my big regrets, is that I didn't get to go to Patagonia with Knowles to teach there. But now I'm thinking, hey, maybe I can sail there. It would take a while, but maybe I could sail there.
Hey, it's never too late. Only after it's over. That's the only time it's too late. That's what I like to live by. So speaking of the wilderness first aid, I really liked the video you did on the anaphylactic shock and how actually low, because that's something you hear a lot about, like people allergic to bees, people allergic to nuts, people allergic to a lot of stuff. So how did the idea come into your head that there, like the numbers of actually reports of people using like an EpiPen or something in the wilderness? Where did this idea come from? The
idea came from teaching a wilderness first aid course. Is that when you teach, the last section that we teach on that course is anaphylaxis, and it scares people, right? And so the question that it gives, that we get from people is, can I go to a pharmacy and just buy an EpiPen in case I need it, or in case someone around me needs it? And with the exception of in California, the answer is no, you can't. But really, what you should be doing is, if you have an allergy that can result in anaphylaxis, then you should get a prescription for it and carry it. And you should be asking the people that you're going into the backcountry with, hey, do you have any food allergies we should know about? Or are you allergic to bee stings? Have you ever had an experience where it could result in anaphylaxis? That's really all you need to do. And then if those people have that allergen, then, or that susceptibility to an allergen, they need to get a prescription and carry an EpiPen. And frequently what we'll do in the backcountry is, if you have an allergic reaction to, say, bee stings that result in anaphylaxis, you should get 2 EpiPens, and you should carry one and I should carry one, so that neither of us are wondering where they are, and they're both safeguarded but separately. And if you're unconscious, I don't have to go digging through your stuff to figure out where the EpiPen is while you suffocate. So that's how it should be handled. But then I started thinking about, as people are asking me that question, can I get an EpiPen to carry just in case? I started to question, how often is this happening? I've never heard of this happening in the backcountry. And the byproduct of working in the outdoor industry for so long is that I know a lot of people. And so I started sending off emails. So I sent an email. I don't like to mention the name of the major corporation that I work for, but I emailed the woman who started that program and oversaw it until this year. And I emailed her and said, I reintroduced myself. I'd met her a couple times, but she's a bigwig. She was a vice president at the time, and I am a lowly paddling instructor. I said, hey, we've met a couple times. My name is Brett. This is where I work. I was curious if you could tell me how many times we've pushed epinephrine in the field. And if this is protected information, I totally understand. Here's why I'm thinking about it. And she responded relatively quickly and said, oh, I can absolutely tell you that. And it's an easy answer. The answer is 0. We've never pushed it. And this particular company is not doing overnight trips, but they are running thousands of students a year through courses. So I emailed off to the curriculum director for Knowles and said, hey, again, if this is protected information, I totally understand it. But I'm curious how often Knowles is pushing Epi in the backcountry. And he said, that is a super easy question. I can tell you the answer. And this, I think, was in 2017. And he said, I'm going to tell you up to 2015 from the founding of Knowles in 1968, because 2016 was a weird year. It was an anomaly year. But up to 2015, I think I have it written down someplace. I think he said that it had been pushed like 4 times in the field from 1968 to 2015.
Wow.
And I said, what happened in 2016? In 2016, 15 times Epi got reported to have been pushed, but all but one of those uses was initiated by students, not instructors. So we don't know reliably that the students were actually having anaphylaxis or just thought they were having anaphylaxis. Mm-hmm. The students are not trained in emergency medicine, whereas the instructors are. I was like, okay, that's interesting information. That is an anomaly year. Let's leave that out of the equation because that data is not reliable. I did the same thing with someone I know that works at North Carolina Outward Bound, and they had a similar, 0 or 2. It's like, this is not happening, right? And so then I started Googling. I was like, so who the heck who's dying of anaphylaxis, right? And something like 350 people a year die of anaphylaxis every year. I was like, how is this happening? And it's happening in hospitals when people are given meds that they're allergic to. Mm-hmm. And so the data is all out there in terms of the people that are actually dying from anaphylaxis. I had the ability to dig a little deeper with the outdoor industry, but you don't need to be carrying an EpiPen unless you have an allergic reaction or a history of allergic reactions. But it's one of those things where we worry about stuff like that on a daily basis. And for the most part, we really don't have to be worrying about them. I think that our culture, this is now becoming a much bigger question, but I think our culture tends to focus on things to be afraid of. And that holds us back from doing a lot of things. Anaphylaxis is not something you need to be afraid of unless you've got a history of anaphylaxis, and then you can manage it.
Okay, yeah, that is an interesting fact. I mean, that's coming from the heavy hitters in the industry too. This isn't just like Bob and Jib's YouTube channel. This is like real.
Yeah, exactly. I went to the people that are making the decisions about everything that goes in a first aid kit. They're seeing every piece of information from every injury in the backcountry. In fact, just the other day, I got an email from Knowles because I'm a wilderness medicine instructor. Knowles does a great job of disseminating information to their instructors. Even though I'm not technically a Knowles expeditions instructor anymore, I still get the information. And so there was a near miss incident on some trip a little while ago, and there was an investigation. And so then Knowles distributes that information as a teaching point for all instructors. And it's awesome that they do that. I have never worked for Outward Bound, so I would imagine they do something similar. And the big corporation that I work for, whose name I won't mention, they do something similar, but they don't do as good a job of it as Knowles does. And it's something that I think that they could do better. But yeah, it's super important to disseminate that information.
Yeah. So we're getting pretty close on time here. I know you got stuff to do, but one thing that I wanted to touch on is you put out a video about, kind of the goal for 2021 maybe is experiences over stuff, which I'm going to say this before we go into it. And you and I know this both probably pretty well without having discussed it, but the outdoors industry is totally full of buy new stuff. The new X cook pot. It's the same as the one from 20 years ago, but it's got shiny yellow coloring and lightning bolts. And so what's your philosophy here with this new outlook on experience over things?
Well, the way that started was on my website. Every year, I've done a list of cool gifts for the outdoors people in your life, followed up like a week later by cool stocking stuffers for the outdoors people in your life. And as I was thinking about doing that one this year, for 20 years, I've self-identified as a minimalist. And at some point this year, it clicked that I shouldn't be doing this. And so I took it from pushing products to pushing experiences. Here are things that you can do that will give you better opportunities for more experiences in the outdoors and make those experiences better. And there are a couple of things that I recommended buying, but they were pretty minimal. And I also don't want to come off as like holier than thou. I do identify as a minimalist, right? But if you're looking at video, look behind me at the wall of gear. I'm pretty strict about the gear that I buy. So I avoid the X-Pot with the shiny new yellow trim or whatever it was you said. I get sucked in just like everyone else does. That's such a cool stove. I'd really like to add that to the gear, right? And I may buy it, but if I'm buying a new stove or I'm buying a new piece of outerwear, I'm retiring or giving away or selling another piece of gear so that I don't end up with, 47 backpacks. I have one full-size backpack and I have a day pack. So I work pretty hard there. I do have a bunch of stoves because I use different types of stoves in classes. I do have a bunch of water filters because I use different water filters in classes. And that's why there's a wall of gear behind me. So again, it goes back to our first question, or one of our first questions, about authenticity. Am I being honest with myself as to who I am and who I want to be? And I realized in that video, or making that video, that hawking gear to folks, I love gear as much as you do, is not authentic to who I want to be. I would much rather people have great experiences. If they're going into the outdoors, the outdoor industry will be satisfied because they're going to end up buying gear anyway. You don't need to be hearing about it from me. Now let's change topics a little bit and talk a little bit about GoPro, which is another thing I've been dealing with. So I shoot my YouTube channel exclusively with GoPros. That's all I use. I've used GoPro since the original HD camera in I don't know what year it was. I got paid and my travel covered by GoPro to go out to GoPro headquarters when they released the Hero 4 Silver, along with about 30 other people, to get trained in the new camera. I have a great relationship with GoPro. I love GoPro. My Hero 9, I have had the absolute worst experience of any camera, not just GoPro, is I have ongoing issues with that camera in terms of particularly the audio, but it's really not even just the audio, but it is mostly the audio. And it's infuriating. I love the company. I don't want to leave them. I've got a workflow that works well with GoPro. I've got tons of accessories like batteries and chargers and stuff like that I don't want to have to switch. But to have, the other day I had a customer service person tell me I'm the only one having the problem that I'm having, which is not absolute nonsense. And so I've been a little outgoing on Twitter in terms of tagging GoPro with here's what's going on. And I really hope I don't end up on their naughty list, because I love the company. I don't mean to knock them, but what's going on right now with my Hero 9 is just not acceptable at all. And that is a piece of gear that I do update every year when they release a new one, and I sell the old one. I get a discount on it because of who I work for, and I sell it at below that discount price. So someone is getting a year-old camera at a really great price. I'm getting a new camera. So I love working with their stuff, but I'm just really unhappy right now with the Hero 9.
Yeah, I for where I work, we just bought three new Hero 9s, and I know you posted something about having issues the day we bought them, and I texted you. I was like, "Oh man, here we go." But yeah, they are a great camera. I'm in the same boat with you. I've had every GoPro. Well, almost. I've probably skipped every other year since the GoPro 3.
I've skipped a handful of years. I skipped the 2 and I skipped the 7. But I think other than that, I've had all of them.
Yeah, I've had the 3 Plus, and then I've had the original like Hero HD, just like it was the bare minimum. And then for the podcast now, I have 3 of the Hero 7s. And I will say, though, their stabilization just blows everything out of the wall. It's just astounding.
And that's one of the things that I don't want to go to one of the other brands. The DJI has a good one. The Insta 1R looks like a great camera. But you put a GoPro hard mounted to the nose of a kayak, and the stabilization is unbelievable. Yeah. Absolutely unbelievable. And that's why I don't want to leave. I just want a working camera.
Yeah, and it is crazy because I do have the DJI Osmo,
the Osmo Action.
The
little one. The little one. Yeah.
It's like a really big pen. It's just like a huge, and that thing's cool, but I feel it has the actual like gimbal that they use on like their DJI drones and stuff, which I also own. Yeah. But I think the GoPro still just decimates how that works. So GoPro, help Brett out and get him a working GoPro, because the man, I mean, you're putting out YouTube videos a lot too, like way more than I am. So you're always out there. But before we go, I know you have a book out. Well, you have multiple books out on Amazon. So why don't you give a quick plug for your books and let people know where to find you? Because I really enjoy your content. I'm always commenting and annoying you with.
Thanks, man. No, it's not annoying. I appreciate it. And so I have a YouTube channel, Adventure Otaku, which is a cross between instruction and sort of life of an outdoor educator, although COVID has hit life of an outdoor educator pretty hard. And then I wrote a series of books called Simple Guides to really are like 40 pages on how to get started at something. So there's a simple guide to kayaking, a simple guide to stand-up paddleboarding, a simple guide to backpacking, and probably in about 2 weeks, a simple guide to kayak camping will be released. And those are available on Amazon or on Apple Books for the iPad. And then I have a big book, like a 300-page book called Go, which is trip planning for from a weekend trip to a month-long adventure. And it sort of breaks down the process for how to plan trips. One of the most common questions that I've gotten over the decades was, how did you know how to plan a trip? And I finally just figured out the process that I use that is sort of time proven, and then it got tweaked by working for Knowles. And so that's available on Amazon as well, and on Apple Books for the iPad. And they're also, all of them are available for Kindle as well. And then you can find me on Instagram, adventure.otaku, or YouTube.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for coming on. I really appreciate you. And, you know, we could probably have you back again because we barely touched the surface of all the stuff I wanted to go over with you. But I really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was great being here.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this episode of the Aptitude Outdoors podcast here on YouTube. If you can help me out, go down below, hit that subscribe button. Also, if you'd be so kind as to head over to iTunes or Stitcher and leave the podcast a rating or review, that would be extremely helpful. I want to thank Brett for coming on and sharing all of his awesome stories, all of his great information. If you want to learn more, you can head over to his YouTube channel, Adventure Otaku. It's a library of paddling and outdoor skills knowledge, van life, everything. You definitely want to check that out. And as always, thank you for watching. I will see you next time.